The moment Britt Westbourne realized the vials were gone, everything inside her shattered. Because this time it wasn't just about survival, it was about time running out. And standing in front of her, Ross Cullum smiled as he crushed her only hope under his heel. Glass shattered. Medicine spilled into the cold air, and just like that, Britt's future was slipping away. But that wasn't even the worst part. Because somewhere in the shadows, someone else was watching, and he was about to make a choice that could change everything. Cassius Faison. The man pretending to be Nathan West. The man no one trusted. And maybe, the only one who could save her. Britt stood frozen at the pier, her breath uneven, her hands trembling. The sound of breaking glass echoed in her ears like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Her medication, gone, not stolen, not hidden, destroyed. Deliberately, cruelly, and Cullum didn't even try to hide his satisfaction. He wanted her to suffer. He wanted her desperate. And worse, he wanted control. Jason Morgan stepped forward, his jaw tight, his eyes locked on Cullum. The tension between them felt like it could explode at any second. But Cullum wasn't afraid, not even a little, because he knew something they didn't. Britt needed him now, more than ever, and that's when everything shifted. Cullum leaned in slightly, his voice calm, almost casual. "You're running out of time, Doctor." Britt felt her stomach drop. Because she knew exactly what he meant. Without the medication, her Huntington's symptoms would return, slowly at first, then all at once. Her hands would shake, her body would betray her, her mind would slip, and there would be nothing she could do to stop it. Unless she played by his rules. And that's when things got even more dangerous, because this wasn't just about medicine anymore. This was about ownership. Cullum wasn't offering help, he was offering a cage. And Britt was already inside it. Days later the effects started creeping in. Subtle, almost invisible, a tremor in her fingers, a moment of dizziness, a lapse in focus that she couldn't explain. Britt tried to ignore it, tried to convince herself it was stress, fear, anything but the truth. But deep down, she knew time was running out. And that's when the ultimatum came. Jens Sidwell didn't waste time with pleasantries, he didn't pretend, he didn't soften the blow, he made it clear: work for us, or lose everything, your career, your freedom, your life, and worst of all, your mind. Britt stood there staring at him, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it might break through her chest. She had fought so hard, she had survived so much. But this was different. Because this time, she couldn't fight it alone, and that's when someone unexpected stepped in. Cassius, fake Nathan, standing just outside the room, watching everything. Listening, calculating, but what was he really thinking? Because his face didn't give anything away. Not anger, not sympathy, not even curiosity, just silence. And that silence was terrifying, because no one knew whose side he was on. But that wasn't the worst part. Because later that night, everything changed. Britt was alone, or at least, she thought she was. She leaned against the counter, gripping the edge tightly as another wave of dizziness hit her. Her breath caught, her vision blurred for just a second, just enough to scare her, and then, a voice behind her: "Don't fight it." Britt spun around, her heart racing. Cassius, standing there, watching her, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension between them was thick, heavy, dangerous. "You shouldn't be here," Britt said, her voice sharp but shaky. Cassius tilted his head slightly, studying her. "You're getting worse." Not a question, a statement. And that's when Britt snapped. "Stay out of it." But Cassius didn't move, didn't react. If anything, he stepped closer, and that's when things got even more complicated. "Sidwell is going to push you harder," he said quietly. "You won't have a choice soon." Britt narrowed her eyes. "Why are you telling me this?" And for the first time, something flickered across his face, something real, something human. "Because you deserve to know what's coming," but that wasn't enough. Not for Britt. "Or because you're part of it," she shot back. Silence, heavy, uncomfortable, and then, "I'm trying to help you." Britt almost laughed. Almost. Because nothing about this felt like help. Nothing about him felt safe. But something inside her hesitated. Because deep down, she didn't think he was lying, and that's when everything shifted again. Because what Cassius said next changed everything. "They're not planning to keep you alive." The words hit like a punch, hard, sudden, unavoidable. Britt froze. "What?" Cassius didn't look away. "Once you finish what they need, you're expendable." And just like that, the illusion shattered. This wasn't about control anymore, this was about survival. Because Britt wasn't just being used, she was being prepared. Disposed of. And that's when fear turned into something else. Something stronger, something sharper, determination. But that wasn't the worst part. Because Cassius wasn't done. "There's something else," he added. Britt's heart pounded. And that's when he leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "I have a plan." Everything inside Britt screamed at her not to trust him, not to believe him, not to fall into another trap. But she didn't walk away. Because she couldn't. Because for the first time since this nightmare began, there was a possibility, a way out. And yet, something still didn't feel right. Because this was Cassius. Fake Nathan, a man with secrets layered on top of lies. So why would he risk everything for her? And that's when Britt asked the one question that changed everything. "Why?" Cassius held her gaze. And for a moment, the mask slipped, just enough to reveal the truth. "Because you're my sister." Silence, heavy, unbelievable, and suddenly, everything made sense. Because if that was true, then this wasn't just about survival anymore, this was about family, and that made everything more dangerous. Because Cassius wasn't just playing a role anymore, he was choosing a side, and once that happened, there was no going back. But what Britt didn't know was that someone else had already figured it out. And they were watching, waiting, ready to strike. And just as Cassius leaned in to explain his plan, a door creaked open behind them, and everything went dark. The lights didn't just flicker, they died. And in that instant, everything spiraled out of control. Britt's breath caught in her throat as darkness swallowed the room. No warning, no explanation. Just silence. Heavy. Threatening. And then, footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Coming closer, Cassius moved instantly, grabbing Britt's arm and pulling her back. "Don't move," he whispered. But it was already too late. Because they weren't alone anymore. A shadow shifted near the doorway, and then a voice. Cold. Amused. "You really thought you could plan this behind my back?" "Cullum." Britt's heart dropped. Because this wasn't just bad timing, this was a setup. And that's when things got even more dangerous. Because Cullum didn't come alone. Another figure stepped forward. Sidwell. Watching, smiling, like he'd been waiting for this moment. Britt felt her pulse spike. Because now, there was no hiding, no pretending, they knew, didn't step back, didn't even flinch. And that alone was enough to change everything. Because for the first time, he wasn't pretending anymore. "You shouldn't be here," Cassius said calmly. Cullum laughed. "Oh, I should be exactly here." His eyes shifted to Britt. "You're becoming a problem again." Britt forced herself to stay steady, even as fear crawled up her spine. "I did everything you asked." "For now," Sidwell added smoothly. "But you're losing control." The words cut deep. Because they were true. And they knew it. But that wasn't the worst part. Because Cullum stepped closer, his gaze locking onto Cassius. "And you?" A pause. A smile. "You've been very busy." The air shifted. Danger tightening around them like a trap. Cassius didn't respond. Didn't deny it. And that silence said everything. "What are you planning?" Sidwell asked, his tone almost curious. Cassius finally spoke. "Something you won't see coming." And that's when everything exploded. Cullum lunged forward. Fast, violent. But Cassius was faster. He shoved Britt back just as chaos erupted. A struggle, a crash. Furniture hitting the floor, Britt stumbled, her vision spinning, her body betraying her at the worst possible moment. Her hands shook, her balance faltered. And for a terrifying second, she couldn't move, because her symptoms were back, worse than before. And that's when things got even more dangerous. Because she wasn't just fighting them anymore, she was fighting herself. Cassius saw it instantly, and something in his expression changed. Urgency, fear. Real fear. "Stay with me," he snapped, grabbing her before she collapsed. But Cullum wasn't done. He recovered quickly, reaching into his jacket and pulling out a syringe. Britt's blood ran cold, because she knew exactly what that meant. Control, compliance, or worse. "Enough games," Cullum said, stepping forward again. Sidwell didn't stop him, didn't interfere, he just watched. Like this was all part of the plan. But that wasn't the worst part. Because Cassius made a decision. A dangerous one. He stepped between Britt and Cullum, blocking him, completely, and in that moment, everything became clear. There was no more pretending, no more playing both sides. Cassius had chosen, and that choice could get him killed. "You're making a mistake," Cullum warned. "Not this time." And that's when everything changed again. Because somewhere outside, sirens, loud, closing in, the tension snapped. Cullum cursed under his breath. Sidwell's smile faded. Just slightly. Because this wasn't part of their plan. But that wasn't the worst part. Because as the sirens grew louder, Cassius turned to Britt. "We don't have much time." Her vision blurred again, her body weak. But her mind, sharp, focused. "What's your plan?" she whispered. Cassius hesitated. Just for a second. Long enough to make everything feel uncertain again. And then, "I'm getting you out." Simple, direct. Impossible, because nothing about this situation was that easy. But Britt didn't argue, didn't question it. Because she didn't have a choice anymore, and that's when things got even more dangerous, because Cullum wasn't finished. He moved again, faster than before, desperate. And this time, he didn't miss. The syringe plunged forward, and everything froze. Because for a split second, no one knew who it hit. Britt gasped. Cassius stiffened. Cullum smiled. And then, a drop of blood hit the floor, but whose blood was it? The room went silent. Too silent. And as the sirens closed in, the truth finally started to reveal itself. Cassius staggered. Just slightly, and Britt's heart stopped. Because that meant he took the hit. He protected her, he chose her, and that changed everything. But that wasn't the end. Not even close. Because Cullum wasn't done, and neither was Sidwell, and whatever was in that syringe was about to change everything. For all of them. Forever. So the question is, can Cassius survive what he just risked? Or did he just sacrifice himself for a sister who may still lose everything? And if Britt escapes this nightmare, will she finally be free? Or is this just the beginning of something even darker? Tell me what you think. Is Cassius really redeeming himself, or is this all part of a bigger, more dangerous plan? And if you want daily *** General Hospital spoilers *** twists and shocking breakdowns like this, make sure you subscribe and stay tuned. Because in Port Charles, the truth never stays buried for long.